Hello, welcome to News-Decoder's second webinar of the 2018-2019 year, Climate Change, What's Happening on the Ground. My name is Nelson Graves. I'm the founder of News-Decoder, and I'm speaking to you from Paris, France. And I'm joined on camera today by students at Friends Seminary School in New York City. Hello, Friends Seminary.
Hi.
Who are the students there?
I'm in my last year of high school, and my name is Daphne Darwish.
I'm Devin Friedrich. I'm also in my last year of high school.
I'm Madeline Lerner, and I'm also in last year of high school.
Thank you, guys. We also have students at King's Academy in Jordan. Good evening, Kings. Who's on camera there?
I'm Anas Badran. I'm in my last year in high school.
I'm Sadra Ghani. I'm in my last year of high school.
And I'm Walid, and I'm also in my last year of high school.
Thank you for joining us, guys. And finally, our third school is Thacher School in California. Thank you for joining us early in the morning there, Thacher. Who do we have on camera there? Hold on, your mic is muted. I'll unmute it. There you go. You can speak now.
I'm James Langan. I'm in my third year of high school.
Hi, James.
I'm Milena Sol. I'm also in my third year of high school. I'm Sky Newlight. I'm in my second year of high school.
Terrific. 9 students. So our topic today is climate change. It's not whether climate change exists or whether it's man-made or who's to blame. This is not a political exercise. Today we're interested in what's happening on the ground. What are cities, regions, companies doing to stave off climate change or to prepare for its effects? 3 students from each of our schools will summarize research and reporting that they've done on the ground. They will then ask questions of each other. 4 students from Friends Seminary have written stories that we've published in the past week on News-Decoder's website. They examine steps New York is taking to cut greenhouse gas emissions and to prepare for big storms. And we look for work from students from the other 2 schools along on the same subject. Now, our viewers today are invited to ask questions or make comments using the chat room on the screen, the bottom of your screen. Please don't be shy. It's there for a reason. After the students finish their presentations, we'll open up the session to questions. And the session will last 1 hour, and we're recording it. With that, I'd like to turn over to Friends Seminary so that we could hear our first presentation. Over to you guys.
Hi. So, as most people know, New York City is a concrete jungle. We are surrounded by concrete and everything is gray and all that concrete retains heat. And when you look at New York City from above, as some people may know, you can see Central Park in the middle, which is super green and lush, and then everything around it kind of looks gray and dull. So one really important thing that New York is doing to help alleviate the issue of climate change and carbon emissions is green roofs and incorporating greenery in our New York City rooftops because we have so much space. Actually, 40,000 acres of roof space is available, and we only use 60 of those acres to include greenery in that. And our school actually is currently undergoing renovation, and we're going to include a green roof on the top of ours. So that's something that our school is implementing. And for example, a company called Brooklyn Grange Farm is also in New York City and working to put green roofs all around the city and implement vertical gardens and things like that. So all about sort of incorporating greenery in the concrete jungle. So, yeah.
Greenery in the concrete jungle. Do we have questions from Thacher or Kings? Let's turn to Kings. Any questions of our first speaker from Friends? No questions. Okay, Thacher, any questions?
Yeah, we have one about the expenses of installing greeneries in the buildings in New York City. Does your school or do you know of any other buildings around the city that have struggled with coming up with the funds from either like corporations or from people at those organizations to install greenery on such expensive real estate?
Yeah, of course, there's the cost of installing it, and then it's a certain amount of upkeep to greenery, right? As opposed to concrete, which you can just let sort of rot. But any answer to that question?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I mean, real estate in New York City is super expensive, and so the cost of a green roof is something to take into account. But it's it's more of an investment than kind of a purchase, because what you're doing is like paying for a green roof in like corporate buildings and places like that ends up paying off more than it costs, because and also implementing things like solar panels and things like that and just using roof space in a smart way ends up paying off more than it kind of detracts, because it also the whole point of green roofs too is to like absorb rainwater and prevent some of that like runoff from rains and floods in like really densely populated cities like New York City. So yeah, I think that it's more of an investment, and compared to some of the other kind of things that buildings can do in terms of like replacing the way that they operate, implementing something like a green roof is like much more cheap than changing an entire system. So yeah.
Terrific. Thanks very much. Let's turn to Kings now and Jordan. And who's your first speaker there?
I will speak. So of recent, at the end of October, there was a terrible tragedy in Jordan where a school trip to the Dead Sea and the school bus full of children, students, and teachers. This bus was swept away in the Dead Sea region, which is full of valleys and is very prone to flash floods. There was an enormous amount of rain that surged in that region, which caused the bus to sweep away from the road. There were 21 confirmed deaths from this tragedy, and the blame was largely attributed to bad infrastructure. But many professors, such as Professor Atif from the German Jordanian University, has acknowledged, among many professors, has acknowledged that climate change is the cause for these sudden surges of rain, which in turn led to this tragedy. The blame and cause for such a tragedy has not been discussed, largely because there has been a large loss of life, and many people are still grieving over the deaths of these children and teachers. And even outside Jordan, other organizations such as the United Nations has not acknowledged climate change as a cause. They simply, such as the United Nations Secretary General has expressed his grief and sorrow, but no organization has attributed climate change as a cause to this tragedy. So in turn, Jordanians and also people outside of Jordan need to acknowledge climate change elsewhere from, for example, the Western world, and see its causes and its consequences, which are happening in Jordan as well, in the Middle East.
Right. Thank you. Friends, any questions of our speaker from Kings?
Yeah, we have a question. In light of these traumatic events of flash flooding, killing 21 people, like you said, is the Jordanian government doing anything to resolve the issue and to address climate change?
Most people who have wanted to attribute some sort of blame to this tragedy have said it's due to bad infrastructure, and that is one way to tackle it. But in turn, I, for example, travel through that region a lot, going to the Dead Sea or crossing the border, and when one goes through that region, that entire region is going to be prone, and not only infrastructure can be blamed on this thing. The government has said that they want to improve the infrastructure, and projects have been promised, but it is not the best way that one should tackle this tragedy in order to assure that doesn't happen again. Yeah.
Perhaps one of the other speakers at Kings will be able to outline what, more generally speaking, the government may or may not be doing with respect to preparing for the effects of climate change or trying to alleviate the greenhouse gas emissions. Thacher, any questions of Kings at this point?
Our question was actually very similar to theirs. We also wanted to know what the government was doing, which I think was answered.
All right. Well, we'll put that on the back burner. Maybe there'll be some follow-up on that on that question. And let's turn then back to California, and we'll have the first speaker there take a crack at the issues. Yep.
So it's quite known that in Southern California, the drought has pervaded the region for like more than a decade at this point. And so our school, because we're in Southern California, has suffered a lot from the drought in particular. And so something that is a direct result of drought are wildfires. And today actually marks exactly a year since the entire Thacher community was forced to evacuate from our campus. And that includes all the horses that we have stored in our campus and the faculty that live there, along with the 250 students. And so we were all forced to evacuate about an hour away from campus because of a wildfire that was threatening our campus. And this wildfire eventually resulted in the 8th most destructive fire in Californian history. It forced over 100,000 people, many of them day students that live in the Ojai, the town in which our school is, in that area, to evacuate as well. And so this was kind of a large reality check because since we are a boarding school, a lot of our students don't come from California. And so we aren't really accustomed to this idea of wildfires and them being something regular and a part of life in Southern California. And so personally for me, because I'm from New Jersey, the wildfire was this huge wake-up call for me that the drought is real and that it threatens even prep school campuses and even those that are trying their best to mitigate climate change and its effects.
So thank you, James. I mean, how has the drought affected sort of daily student life on campus? I mean, do you ration water? Do you brush your teeth using less water? Do you take less water at the dining hall? I mean, what are some of the sort of concrete effects that that you're seeing at the campus level?
A lot of the environmental initiatives on our campus are actually student-led. And so the student-run Environmental Action Committee is doing a lot to raise general environmental awareness throughout campus. And they also have a lot of initiatives for students to conserve water. And so we have a water tracking system at our school, and you can see how much each dorm is consuming of water per month. And so we have an event called the Green Cup Challenge multiple times a year to see which dorm can save the most water and save the most energy in general. And besides that, the systems we use on campus to water our sports fields or to water the gardens and the kinds of plants that we find on our campus are very much centralized to use as little water as possible and to recycle this water. And this water is also recycled in the laundry systems that are found in faculty homes and in the dorms as well. And so because of all of this, in the past year, Thacher has been able to cut its water consumption by over 50%. And that's from last year's total, which was also cut at around 50% from the year before.
Wow. And
so even in the past 2 to 3 years, we've been able to severely cut our water consumption just because of environmental awareness from the students and the faculty alike.
That's significant. That's significant. Questions from Friends or from Kings of Thacher?
We have a question from Friends in the chat room.
Yeah, go ahead.
So Friends would like to know how low-income families are impacted by drought and fires in California. So this is kind of looking more at the state level now.
Our research centered mostly around our school, our town, and our county, Ventura County. So we haven't exactly looked at it on the state level, but what I will go into talking about later is there are severe effects in our area, in our county, especially economically on farmers. So we've seen a lot of effects of the drought there, but our research did not cover low-income families throughout the state.
Okay, fair enough. Question from Kings of Thacher at this stage?
How did the government react to the situation?
You mean the state government, local? We're going to hear about the county and the region later. So maybe we'll you know, if you've got a follow-up question to that presentation at that point, that might be best. So let's go back to Friends, and we've got our second. If I haven't lost track here, I tend to do that sometimes. Sorry. I think we're back at Friends with our second presenter. Is that right?
Yeah. So again,
okay.
Like Daphne said, buildings and concrete make up basically all of New York City, and there's a lot of heat trapping, but also since life is conducted within these buildings, like we're in school right now, we live in apartment buildings, it's really important to figure out how to reduce the impact on the environment through living in these buildings. So one amazing example of a building that is really that's going above and beyond to address climate change is One Bryant Park, which is a massive office building on 42nd Street and 6th Avenue. It's about 50 floors high. It's completely glass on the front, and it has sort of a frosted glass look that actually plays a role in its efforts. And it was designed in 2007 to be completely just cohesively designed to reduce its climate change impact. So for example, in the basement, we toured the mechanical room, and there are 44 giant ice tanks, bigger than 5 people could wrap their arms around. And at night, they use off-peak energy to cool those ice tanks. And then throughout the day, they pump glycerol, some sort of alcohol-based substance, through those tanks and then up to the floors where the air is then cooled and then pumped around the office space. They also have an on-site natural gas generator, which is much more efficient than buying energy that is burned from natural gas from outside the city. And also with the frosted glass, they have a ceramic overlay on the windows that reduces the solar impact that reduces how much the sun heats up the air within the building. So like I said, they're really going above and beyond. In 9 years since it was built, many buildings are still not doing these sorts of things, but the city is taking initiative to encourage these sorts of fixes, and they want to cut emissions by 80% by 2050 as part of the Paris Climate Agreement goal. So, and that involves encouraging buildings to have these sorts of cohesive systems, but also to take cheaper solutions like the ceramic overlay on the windows and like painting roofs white to reflect solar energy, or just green roofs, like Daphne was saying.
So One Bryant Park was designed or built in 2007. That's before climate change became a household word. How did they know in advance to do that?
I mean, climate change has been an issue since the 70s. It might not have been household, but people who are sort of attuned to that definitely knew that it was an important issue to address. So I guess the designers chose to address that early.
Fair enough. Good. Okay. Well, they were foresighted. Questions of Friends Seminary from either California or Jordan? Yeah. Go ahead, Jordan.
I have a question in regards, how can other buildings implement such design and technology? And like older buildings, not like the one that you mentioned. Is it financially beneficial to undergo such renovations?
Yeah, retrofitting.
Yeah, so like I said, there's a cool roofs initiative that the city government is taking on to very cheaply just paint roofs white, because right now many roofs are tarred over with black colored tar, and it absorbs a lot of energy. So just very cheaply get reflective paint and paint the roofs so that it reflects the energy. And then green roofs, of course, are more expensive, but another solution that can actually boost property values. And then with these more advanced systems, it's definitely harder to retrofit older buildings. There's a statistic that 80% of the buildings that are built right now will be there in 50 years. So there's definitely an emphasis on these sort of solutions to addressing how the external environment will impact the building rather than how the building will address its own issues. But these solutions are definitely economical, both with property value, how having a green roof can make the building more valuable, and then also with insulation, and it will cost less to cool the buildings during the summer. Yeah.
Could you explain how having a green roof would raise the property value? What's the logic there?
Yeah, so a lot of townhouse owners are actually are installing green roofs, and it's sort of an amenity. It's a roof deck. It's a place to entertain. It's a place to get away from stress in your life, I guess. Especially in the city. Like Daphne said, Central Park is one of the few green spaces. So to have a green space of your own can be very beneficial on the real estate market. And then also just the sort of feature of being able to absorb rainwater definitely helps.
Yeah, and I suppose if utility bills are lower, then it might make the property more attractive to buyers and it might drive up the prices. Anyways, that's my back of the seat of the pants economic analysis. Thacher, Kings, any questions of Friends?
Oh, we had a question.
Yeah, please.
You talked a lot about all of, obviously, the buildings that are using methods to decrease effects of climate change, but we're wondering if there are any corporations or building owners in New York who are opposing these efforts to improve buildings, and whether that is an issue or caused by economic motivations, or what is happening with that.
Our research didn't really cover whether or not there's overt opposition to implementing climate beneficial policies, but there definitely is the cost issue. I mean, I guess on the flip side, the Juris organization, which operates One Bryant Park, makes a very intentional effort to like put green roofs on every surface, on every roof surface that's possible, just like cheap plastic green roofs. But there are definitely organizations and real estate companies that are sort of reluctant to spend the money on that, I would assume, and that they might not see it as worth the cost.
Savannah and I are speaking from Paris, and of course you may have been following the Yellow Vest movement here, which has been contesting higher road taxes, which were intended to help France meet its commitments at the Paris Climate Accord. And of course, so the debate in many cases is not simply those who believe that climate change is man-made against those who believe it is man-made, but it's actually, you know, it's around the edges. What can we do? What can we afford to do in the short term to meet our long-term goals? Anyways, that's a very long-winded thing of me to say. I think it's now turned to go to King's Academy in Jordan for their second presentation. Over to you guys.
So I'm going to be speaking right now. I'm going to talk about Jordan's electric cars and how the government is trying to incentivize buying electric cars. So electric cars were first, or EVs, were first introduced to Jordan in 2015. And according to Jordanian Department of Statistics, there were only 3,586 registered electric cars in May of 2017. So within 2 years, there were only around 4,000 electric cars or EVs. And this is mainly due to the limitation of the cars that we can import to Jordan due to the high customs and taxes and the unavailability of charging resources, for example. So the only 5 EVs that we can actually buy in Jordan are Nissan, Tesla, BMW, Ford, and Hyundai. And for some people, they're economically impractical because some Tesla models can go up to 100,000 JDs or Jordanian dinars, which is pretty expensive for the average Jordanian. And some people chose at least not to buy EVs because the battery size for the affordable EVs in Jordan is pretty small. And there's a guy we interviewed. He talks about why he didn't buy a Nissan Leaf. He says, with its present small battery size, it is not practical for my day-to-day use. I drive more than 120 to 150 kilometers daily. So in 2018, by the end of 2018 this year, Uber Jordan is trying to make at least 50% of its cars EVs. And we had an interview with the head of operations at Uber in Jordan, and this is what he said. To put this into perspective, today it would cost a driver almost 8 Jordanian dinars and petrol to drive 100 kilometers. To go that distance in a full battery electric vehicle, they could pay just over 1 dinar for electricity. So around 1/8 the price, and it's more sustainable for the environment. And the Jordanian government is trying to incentivize this by making charging available everywhere. So they got 18 permits to install e-cars charging stations around Amman, the capital, and they do not tax EVs anymore. So when you get it, you just get it for the net price.
Right. Electric cars. Let's have a little poll here, guys. Raise your hands if you or your family are driving an electric car. Friends, anybody there? Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
Okay, we have one.
So not really, but
it's a hybrid. Okay, that's a half a vote. You can put up half a hand. Okay, Thatcher, anybody got an electric car there? No. Not even a hybrid. I thought California was cutting edge. And how about Kings, where they're clearly subsidizing and pushing it? There you go. Okay, up 2. Okay, so we have 2.5 out of 9. That's about almost 30%. Okay, we're doing pretty well. Anyways, thank you for that presentation. Questions from Friends or Thatcher? Friends, you got a question of Kings on electric cars?
Well, I was gonna ask about kind of the things that the Jordanian government is doing to make electric cars more accessible, but it sounds like you really touched on a lot of those points, like charging stations and implementing less taxes.
Okay. Right. Thatcher, question of Kings on electric cars? Yep.
Yeah. So you were talking about how the government is subsidizing sort of the cars that are already in Jordan. However, is there a chance that the electric car industry could be brought to Jordan, or that more electric cars could be manufactured in the country itself? Like you said that there are already only a couple of car companies there. So is there any likelihood that they will start mass producing more efficient electric cars?
I think with the limited resources in Jordan, at least, it would be very expensive to produce more EVs in Jordan. But we can import, and I think this is what the government is trying to push, which is importing cars from outside. So, for example, we import cars from Japan, from Germany, and from Korea, and the government exempts the citizens from paying customs. So it's basically cheaper for us to import than produce here. So this is what the government is trying to push to expand the EV offerings we have in Jordan.
Okay, good. Before we turn back to Friends for the last presenter there, I have to acknowledge I've botched my very easy job by not introducing my colleague who keeps News-Decoder afloat in Paris and who is sitting next to me here in Paris, even though we're on different screens, Savannah Jenkins. Welcome, Savannah. Right, so let's go back to Friends. Last presenter. Oh, did you have a question? Thatcher, I'm sorry, I've messed up again. There we go, Thatcher, last presenter.
So in looking at climate change near us, I focused in my research on how climate change has affected farmers in the Ojai Valley, which is the town and area where our school is. So through interviewing a farmer in Ojai and also a member of the Ojai Valley Green Coalition, which is an organization dedicated to helping Ojai in terms of climate change, I noticed there's a discrepancy between what might be an idea for by outsiders to improve how farmers could do better in terms of climate change by implementing permaculture, which is working with the land to grow crops in sort of a more natural way. So the member of the Ojai Valley Green Coalition believed that permaculture is the answer to improving farming while working with the changing climate. but upon talking to the farmer, she said that it's very important to consider the financial ramifications of trying to change farming practices. And she said, quote, "I don't know any example of permaculture in Southern California where people are actually making a living off of the land. They can grow their own food, but are they saving money to send their kids to school? Can they pay their health care? I haven't found an example of that," quote. And so she was very concerned about how climate change was affecting her farm specifically economically due to the drought and fire, and was concerned that using permaculture to work with the land wasn't necessarily the answer to her problems, as she is running a business in addition to working with the land. So due to the drought, she has had to reduce her farm's acreage because it's impossible to continue to water the same amount of trees. She grows citrus trees, which is the main crop in Ojai. She had to reduce watering her trees, which meant cutting down on her acreage. Some of her farm burned in the fire that James mentioned last year, which also led to the destruction of some irrigation pipes. And then there were mudslides that occurred after the fire due to heavy rains, which also destroyed some of her farm. So she's been severely affected by climate change, and there are not many easy ways to reverse the effects of climate change for farmers, because, as I mentioned before, she can reduce her trees. She could increase her use of mulch and manure to increase the soil's water retention, and she could update sprinklers to keep them safe from wildlife effects. But really, what I've learned from her experience as a farmer in Ojai is that climate change is making, with the drought and the fire, it's making it very difficult to maintain the profession, as the cost of water has gone from $230 per acre foot to $470 per acre foot in the last 10 or 12 years. So climate change to continue their standard of living if they're earning only based off of the land. And it's creating issues of whether or not farmers can continue to farm in the Ojai Valley with all of the climate change effects happening.
Yes, clearly adjusting to climate change is a very costly business. It has effects at so many different levels. I mean, health, which you in California have experienced firsthand very recently, but also the economy, trade, you name it, even geopolitics, as I think we're going to increasingly see if the effects of climate change are not curbed. Anyways, any questions of Thacher from New York? Yeah, please.
You talked about how farmers primarily farm citrus, and that citrus is a really big water consumer. Is the government or are farmers looking to other crops that they could possibly farm instead, or are there too many negative economic impacts?
Is there a shift away from citrus?
There isn't really. There's also a lot of avocados grown in the Ojai Valley, but one misconception about citrus is that it uses more water than other crops. And one thing, in talking to this farmer, I learned that when they talk about how much water is used to produce different crops, they might be comparing lettuce or something like that to a tree crop. And while it might take less water to tree crop, so a lot of times people say that Ojai should be moving away from citrus, that it's too expensive a crop, but actually in terms of the annual cost, citrus can cost less than other crops that are planted triennially. So no, the Ojai Valley is not currently, it's actually more water efficient to continue planting citrus.
Interesting. Kings, any questions of yeah, Thacher? Yeah. Go ahead, please.
I have a question. I know the drought in California has been a statewide problem. I remember hearing about this drought for maybe about like since a decade ago, reading articles about it and such. And although it's been a statewide issue, it's garnered nationwide attention. And so I'm curious, I mean, also the state government, well, if the federal government has given any aid to such farmers affected by this drought.
So, in terms of government subsidies and sort of crop insurance and helping the farmers with natural disasters and the things that have been effects of the drought, Ventura County has not been really receiving that much aid, especially because our current subsidy system and the way that government aid is structured doesn't necessarily allow for smaller farmers to get significant aid. According to the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition, approximately 20% of government agricultural subsidies right now are going to the top 1% of farms that are, selling the most. So in terms of reaching out to smaller farms, and those are obviously the ones that are being hit the hardest, especially in California, it's receiving federal aid isn't really in the picture at this point.
Yes, somebody I used to cover farm policy in Washington. Typically, the largest subsidies go to the largest farms in the United States. That's the structure of the subsidy system in the U.S. If I'm not mistaken, we go back to Friends in New York for, I believe it's the third presentation. Over to you guys.
Hi. So after Hurricane, much of the northern Atlantic coast was severely damaged from storm surge and flooding. In preparation for future damages, New York and groups like the New York-New Jersey Metropolitan Storm Surge Working Group have looked to creating some sort of mode of protection for protecting against storm surge in the future. And they've looked to cities like Rotterdam and like Stamford who have implemented these walls, which would be raised in the event of a storm to protect against storm surge and flooding. The wall would basically protect the entire New York harbor from these storms. So scientists have warned everyone that with climate change will come an increase in more severe storms, and New York government is actively looking for modes of protection that could protect places like New York, which are like really very vulnerable to water since they are surrounded by water. There has been a lot of pushback for this specific plan because of its expenses and its potential effects on the environment, but it is the most, I guess, solid and researched plan that we have so far.
I believe you wrote about that in a story which we published on News-Decoder this week. Is that right? Thank you. Questions of friends on that, on the issue of protecting against storm surges, which are projected to be in the offing in the future. Kings, any questions? No? Thatcher, any question of New York?
I was just wondering how the storm surges and that affects the different boroughs of New York, and do you think that communities in typically low-income boroughs such as the Bronx or Queens have a higher or lower chance of suffering from storm surges versus Manhattan or Brooklyn?
Interesting question. Yeah, is there a discrepancy in the treatment according to the boroughs?
So this wall would basically protect the entire harbor on the top of Long Island, so that would especially around the Bronx and Queens, and then also at the bottom, which would protect most of New Jersey and Manhattan. So I don't think the wall actually would unfairly affect or help certain boroughs over others. I think there are without the wall, there are certain parts of New York and New Jersey that are more affected, but that's not something that I think that especially the wall is going to affect really.
Right, yeah. Anyone, if you go to Venice as a tourist, you should know that Venice has a very ambitious program to try to protect the lagoon there from surging water volumes. We're 40 minutes past the hour. We should move along here. I guess our next speaker would be our last one from Kings. Over to you guys.
Oh, so here at Kings, we're trying to incorporate greenery in our community as hard as we can. Recently, we just implemented and developed a 2.6 megawatt peak solar panel system into our community. This provides Kings with a safe, reliable, and economical energy supply, which contributed to sourcing our school's electricity.
We're having an audio issue here from Kings. Is your microphone giving you trouble?
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Thank you.
So what I wanted to say is that we recently just implemented and developed a solar panel system. It's basically a 2.6 megawatt peak solar photovoltaic facility on the school campus. And another thing we're trying to do is to address the consequences of climate change on campus and during our school meetings. Improve our attitude towards recycling, food wasting, and the problems of climate change.
Solar panels, no problem generating power from solar panels in Jordan, I should think. Any questions from New York or Thacher on the issue of what their school is doing to combat climate change?
So with both the solar panels and the shower heads that Kings has installed, is there any predicted, I guess, cost savings over time, given the initial upfront costs with the reduced cost of water and power? Would that cover the costs at some point in the future?
So basically, the solar panels were donated by the International Company for Water and Power Projects in the Middle East. So I don't think that will affect the amount of money that we're going to save in the future. We'll probably save a lot.
Considering the fact that Kings is currently fully powered on solar energy, I think Kings used to pay 24 million JDs of electricity a year, and now Kings only pays around 400 to 500,000 a year. So that's like almost 23 million and a half JDs saved per year.
Significant savings. Thatcher, any questions of Kings? Sorry.
We had one from Daisy Lawrence, who's the student ambassador of Thacher.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
I think it was answered briefly in the beginning of what you said. Maybe you could speak more to this regional alliance, but she asked, where is Jordan getting its solar panels from? So you mentioned the organization, but maybe you could speak more about the partnership.
So we signed the memorandum of understanding with the National Company for Water and Power Projects, aka the ACWA Power, which donated $4 million so we can establish the solar panel system here.
Does that answer? I guess Daisy's asked it through. Yeah. Okay. Right. So let's see. I'm confused here. I guess we go back to Thacher. Now we have the last presentation. There we go. Over to you guys.
Research group largely focused on the county as a whole. We sort of picked up where Milena's group left off on individual farmers and looked at where there were all of these detrimental impacts of changing farming practices. Where can policy sort of pick up the slack in the rest of Ventura County? So in our interviewing process, we actually spoke to Phil White, who is a Ventura County planning commissioner that's been working closely with the Ventura County General Plan. And he's really been on the front lines of implementing climate change policy. When we spoke to him, he had just come from a meeting to cement the general plan, which has not been updated in 20 years, but includes all of the allocations for land and zoning ordinances and includes land use regulations. And he said that in the session update on the general plan, what was most contentious, and this is a quote, what they spent the most amount of time on was climate, which is very exciting, especially because right now in the state of California, by 2050, we need to reduce emissions by 80%, carbon emissions. And so Ventura County is now doing its part with this Ventura County General Plan to implement climate change action. And what he was saying is that we need to look to hybrid electric and hydrogen vehicles, changing AC units, things like that. But what they're really focusing on is sort of raising awareness and giving climate change the weight of law behind it. And so to start changing zoning ordinances and things to adapt and be resilient in terms of the effects of climate change in Ventura County. However, there are 10 cities in Ventura County, and the plan isn't going to be published until 2020. So between then and now, we're seeing a lot of changes city by city, and there is sort of been clapback, especially from the petroleum industry, which is very present in Ventura County. They're very much into business as usual, and they've been talking about how we need to keep jobs and local oil as a part of Ventura County. So the Planning Commission has been having to deal with all of this in looking at how policy will be spread to incorporate climate change.
Super. You said you spoke to a policymaker at the county level. Have you been able to take part in or attend any meetings, any county meetings, any committee meetings that discuss climate change there?
We have not yet. We've definitely watched videos, especially from locally in Ojai. We had plans to, but they were all sort of scheduled during the school day.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Okay.
Although we haven't actively gone to visit climate activists in the Ojai Valley area, a few have come to schools as invited speakers. And so we have a little bit of exposure to the ideas in the general Ventura area, though we have a lot to learn, obviously.
Got you. Okay. Before we open it up to general questions, any questions of our last speaker from Thacher from either Friends or Kings? Friends, any questions? Yeah, please go ahead.
We were just wondering how the efforts in Ventura County compare to efforts in other California counties, especially in ones in LA that are also, especially in Malibu recently, that have been affected by the fires. Like, are they similar? Are they doing very similar things? And are they, in communication with what they can do to help prevent future damages?
I think the way of life.
Sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I think the way of life in Ventura County is a lot more agricultural than perhaps Los Angeles County, which is a lot more urbanized. And so in urban and suburban communities in California, we've actually seen a lot of ordinances and a lot of limits placed by town committees and town governments to mitigate effects of climate change and overconsumption of water. So for example, in suburbs, many towns have banned the use of fountains in front lawns, and they've put on restrictions for the times where you can water your lawn or water the pavement in front of your house and things like that. And a lot of these are led to very heavy fines. So you can be fined up to $10,000 a day for watering your lawn or for using a fountain without a proper draining system in your front lawn. Because it comes down to kind of the opulence that we enjoy in America and how we've kind of taken too much of an advantage over the comfort we have and the access to clean water we have. And so now we're seeing this kind of bite ourselves in the butt because now we have a problem with an overconsumption of water and we don't have enough water for the kind of lifestyle that a lot of Californians want to live.
Great. I think three speakers had a chance to present. Is that right? Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm right for change. With that, Savannah, I believe who is the pretty much the the guru, the climate change guru or environment guru, News-Decoder, has a question. What was her question then?
Yes, so this is directed to King's Academy. She's interested to know a bit more about weather changes in Jordan because unusual and extreme weather is a sign of climate change. So she'd like to know if the flash floods in the Dead Sea Valley have become more frequent and if perhaps the authorities, if the authorities are perhaps ignoring changes that would suggest climate change is impacting the country.
So yes, in recent years, there has been an increase in these abnormal sudden surges of rain, which in turn causes these flash floods. It's been brought into light, these effects with this tragedy, but people still have failed to acknowledge it largely. Me, for one, I travel through that region a lot. I cross to the West Bank to Palestine, and that requires me to travel through the Dead Sea Valley region. And especially in these days, sort of December and January, there is rain, and driving is very dangerous, and one has to be very careful when driving in that region because the rain, which may happen, brings these flash floods. And when the rain is sudden and unanticipated, it creates such tragedies, which was the case with the tragedy of with the school bus.
Savannah, I think you had another question. Is that right?
Yes, thank you for that eloquent answer. So we have a question from Friends Seminary, and I think it could be addressed to anyone who feels like they have something to say about it. So it's actually a quote from the former president of Ireland, Mary Robinson. So she's argued that climate change has had a disparate impact on First Nations and developing nations. She argues that while countries of North America are responsible for disproportionate greenhouse gas emissions, they do not experience the adverse impact in the same way as, say, countries on the African continent. Although this conversation is focused on a couple of different local contexts, how might we make sense of this larger reality?
That's a big question.
It's very long-winded, yes.
No, it's not long-winded. It's a big question. It's an important one. Anyone want to tackle that one?
Yeah, so I feel like you could see that very much highlighted with the specific case of Jordan because if such storm surges were to happen in a developed nation, let's say, for example, in the US and Europe, which has a good infrastructure, the roads would not allow a bus to be swept away from the road. But bad infrastructure in a developing nation like Jordan means the effects of climate change makes the consequences more drastic and negative for its citizens. So I feel like this is a good example with what the is it the President of Ireland or Prime Minister of Ireland? Yeah, what she's
we're talking about sort of the imbalance of costs. Actually, is there a sense in Jordan that a developing country is being asked to bear the costs of adjusting to climate change, whereas it's not responsible or not as responsible as the developed world for the greenhouse gases which are causing climate change? Is that a prevalent sense in Jordan among the citizens there?
I think Jordan is expected to adjust to the rapidly changing Jordanian climate. So, for example, 2 years ago, or 2 decades ago, I mean, you wouldn't see rain would be constant, and it wouldn't be like throughout the winter. Rain would be like more spaced out, and it wouldn't be as hard. But now, and like more specifically this year and last year, the rain is like it's usually dry and really cold, and then when it rains like for 3 or 4 days, which allows for the flash floods to happen. So, and Jordan is like expected to like bear the costs of this, of like fixing its entire infrastructure, because the infrastructure on which Jordan was built was like weak in the first place. So there's so much that has to change, and it's very costly for any country, as specifically Jordan, which is like in $40 billion debt right now.
Thank you. I had a question of any or all students, and that is this. Each of you has looked at a sort of what I might call a micro issue relating to climate change. You've dug into some of the nitty gritty, which is the whole purpose of this. Actually, done some on the ground research and reporting, which has really, I think, given you tremendous insights. My question, though, is: do you think that ad hoc steps, such as you've described here, which may be to a certain extent uncoordinated, will be enough to stave off disastrous effects of climate change in the long run? Or do you think that there is a general global coordination that needs to be tightened in order to really stave off a catastrophe? Any students have any thoughts on that? Anybody in New York have any thoughts on that? I mean, you had Hurricane Sandy in 2012. Any thoughts on whether the steps that New York City is taking on an ad hoc sort of discrete basis will be enough?
I think with Hurricane Sandy and with the increase in these severe storms, small steps really aren't going to be enough. Especially like in the government, I think something like the wall, something bigger, is like really the only steps that we can take to prevent this. Just because climate change has already gone so far as we can't really reverse this new plan for increase in storms. And I think these bigger steps need to be taken. Otherwise, the city is just too vulnerable, and it can't sustain these storms.
As a young person, do you feel frustrated frustrated that the effects may not be able to be countered in time?
It's very frustrating. We see it every day. I wrote about this in my article, but the subways, which are like the lifeline of the city, it's how everybody gets around. They have been severely damaged from the storm surge and from these hurricanes. And like little by little throughout my life, it's gotten more and more difficult to, I guess, fix the damages from these storms. And it's frustrating to live in a place where you can't reverse it and you're just watching it get worse and worse.
Yeah, I just want to say one thing as well. When I was writing my article with Devin about sustainable buildings in New York, which is kind of a micro issue, like you said, we talked to some architects, and they said that while to continue fighting for more sustainable buildings and constructing these buildings that reduce the carbon footprint is really important, it's also everyone needs to talk to their representatives in government to really make an impact and try to combat this challenge like full on, because otherwise, yes, creating green roofs and all of these things are very important. The problem of climate change is just so large right now that it needs to be more, I guess, full on. Yeah, that's what they told us.
I guess also in the U.S. we've seen that since Trump withdrew from the Paris Agreement, many cities and states have sort of, decided to just go at it alone. Like New York City, for one, New York State, California, I know, and a lot of cities just throughout the country are sort of doing that. But I sort of think in the same way that like a building with sort of, a couple of old and a couple of new things can't operate as efficiently. The country can't, go on being completely sustainable, and the country won't reach its goal unless everything is operating together and operating sort of anew. So I definitely think that without sort of full cooperation, we'll never get to where we have to be.
Savannah, were there other questions from the chat room?
Yes, there was
one that was more pointed towards Kings. Should we wrap up with that?
Sure.
Okay, so Daisy Lawrence, who as I mentioned before, is one of 3 student ambassadors at Thacher. She asks, has the migrant crisis in Jordan caused the issue of climate change to be put on hold as the country grapples with the strain of refugees coming from Syria?
Can you please repeat the question?
So I think the question basically is whether the cost of accommodating so many refugees from Syria, from the civil war in Syria, has made it more difficult for Jordan to take difficult and costly steps to defend against climate change or to stave off the effects.
I think in Jordan specifically, the Syrian crisis has pushed the government to take more and more loans from the IMF every year. So our every year we're going like deeper and deeper in debt because of the extensive numbers of refugees here in Jordan. But also that did not, I think, stop the government from taking like big and important steps towards sustainability in general. Because, for example, electric cars or EVs were introduced in 2015, and the Syrian crisis has been going on since 2008. And movement towards solar panels has been is recent and is more recent, I would say, than the Syrian crisis. And also in 2016, Jordan, I didn't mention this in my presentation, but I think I should have. Jordan decided to build 2 small nuclear energy. I don't know how nuclear energy works, but I think it's like nuclear energy reactors. So so Jordan wants to start what's it called? Jordan wants to start basically using nuclear energy because it's cleaner for the environment and there are no carbon dioxide emissions. It's only steam emissions.
Wow.
And
I didn't know that Jordan was going to be building nuclear reactors. That's a news. Anyways, yeah, it doesn't have to be a zero-sum game after all. The trade-offs between costs like accommodating Syrian refugees and climate change, it doesn't have to be, you don't have to trade one for the other. Anyways, our time is up. We're actually 2 minutes over. And with that, I wanted to thank the schools on board here and the faculty and the students for being in this session, for making this session possible. Special thanks to the students who did the reporting. I hope it was useful. It's the way reporters work, where they actually dig into the ground to get a feel for what's happening, not only at the macro level, but at the micro level, and then you can extrapolate from that and look more. You'll understand the macro level better. I want to thank Friends for the 2 stories that they've submitted and which we've published in the last week on the subject of climate change. Terrific stories. We look forward to more material from the other students on climate change so that we can flesh out this theme on our website. And I want to finally thank Savannah for joining me here and wish everyone a good night and keep up the good fight in the interests of sparing our planet. Thank you all. Cheers.
Thank you, Savannah.